You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 2nd of February 2026 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, broadcasting live from Studio One here at Midori House in London. I'm Chris Chermak. Coming up on today's program, the Rafah border crossing between Gaza and Egypt has reopened, sort of. We'll examine the moment with Julie Norman. After that, that is a sound you will not be hearing much of in Germany today as public transport workers go on strike. We'll look at how symptomatic the strike is of Germany's wider economic struggles. We'll also get the business headlines, including a curious slump in commodities. And finally, the music world's attention was drawn to the Grammys over the weekend. Fernando Augusto Pacheco, what caught your eye?
Hello, Chris. We'll discuss, of course, the historic Album of the Year victory for Bad Bunny.
All that right here on The Briefing with me, Chris Chermak. And a very happy Monday to all of our listeners out there. Hope you've had a great weekend. We're going to start the show in Israel, which does appear to have opened the Rafah crossing between Gaza and Egypt today, albeit with some pretty tight restrictions. Well, joining me now is Julie Norman, Associate Professor of Politics and International Relations at UCL, also co-author of Gaza, the Dream and the Nightmare. Julie, great to have you on the show. Let's start with, you've talked about the Rafah crossing before. How significant is it that it's actually opening, even if only partially today?
Well, good afternoon, Chris. This is very significant. It was a key piece of the proposal back in October. It was something many were hoping would come sooner than now. But the fact that it is happening symbolically is very important for Gazans to have what's often described as a lifeline, if you will, to the rest of the world. This is the crossing that Gazans historically have been able to pass through in kind of different levels of restrictions. So I would say it is opening. That's important, but we should be very cognizant of the limitations with it. First, it's only pedestrian right now, so there will not be aid convoys or trucks of goods and that kind of thing coming through. And there will also be very strict controls over who can pass, especially who can come into Gaza. The crossing will technically be operated by the Palestinian Authority with European observers, but Israel will be very much involved in approving individuals who can pass. And there will indeed be a sort of second internal checkpoint run by Israel for those entering the Strip.
Well, Julie, to that point then, I understand there were some reports last week, certainly, that this release, or ahead of the opening of the Rafah crossing, that Israel might be essentially seeking to let more people out of Gaza than into Gaza. Is there any truth to that? Are you worried that that's what we might see now that it's open?
Well, I think that's very true, Chris. And I would say Netanyahu and Israeli officials have not been hiding the ball on that one. They've been pretty open about the fact that they are much more willing to approve exits from Gaza than people crossing into Gaza. For some people, that will be many people who are waiting for medical aid. There's at least 50,000 Palestinians who need to get out for medical aid, so that will be important. But I think many people are rightly worried that this will encourage a transfer out of Gaza, but not allowing people to return who want to return, and an imbalance there. But again, the numbers we're thinking of right now are probably they're saying about 50 people, like a couple dozen each day, who would be getting back and forth. So the numbers coming in are going to be quite small, and that is something I think everyone will be keeping an eye on.
Well, as you said in your first answer as well, then this is symbolic and significant as a symbolic move, but with such small numbers, it's not really an opening. Is there an expectation? Do we know when there might be a fuller reopening of Rafah?
Everything regarding Gaza right now, I would say, is very much in flux. Obviously, there will be internal, I think, pressures to open Rafah further, certainly from the new Gazan technocratic committee that's coming in, from Palestinians within Gaza, of course. But a lot of that, I think, will remain to be seen. For Israel, so much is set on the security situation. I think until they feel that Gaza is secure from their point of view, which I think is going to be a long time, I think it's going to be very unlikely that we'll see much more of an opening from Rafah in more meaningful terms.
And I understand that there's still no journalists being allowed into Gaza. Is that something being talked about there? Is there any expectation that that might change?
Yeah, I would say there's been a lot of pressure on that since the ceasefire. I think the Rafah crossing will definitely amp up that pressure. Again, it's something that right now Israel is not looking to entertain, especially while they are still carrying out operations in the Strip. Again, I do think that pressure will increase, and it's something that, as you well know, on the journalist and journalists around the world have been pushing for that, and I think that will only build from here on out.
Well, and you did mention operations that are happening in Gaza. I did want to ask you about that as well, Julie, because another 30 Palestinians were killed in a strike over the weekend. How significant a breach of the ceasefire was that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously very significant. I would point out it's definitely not the first. Over 450 Gazans have been killed since the ceasefire went into effect in October. But this level of this strike with several dozen killed, reports from inside saying mostly, women and children, certainly was one of the largest casualty numbers we've seen in a single day in several months. And again, coming right before the Rafah border opening. So I think, again, this is not a conflict that's going to be quiet anytime soon. And I think for many Palestinians, the concern is making sure that it does stay central on the world agenda, and that Palestinians inside Gaza are not forgotten at this moment.
Well, and just finally, Julie, I mean, speaking of the cost that Gazans have had to bear over these last couple of years of war, Israel authorities have now confirmed, I understand, the number of Palestinians killed, around 70,000 in this war, 2 journalists. Were you surprised by that admission? Because Israel had, until now, been basically throwing doubt on the Palestinian numbers from the health authorities there.
Yeah, so there was this confirmation in a press conference. I will say the IDF is being a bit careful in how they confirm that number or not officially, but that acknowledgement did come through. And I would say when I have talked with Israeli security officials in the last 2 years, many of them acknowledge that the numbers are probably not that far off, but it was more the proportion within the numbers of civilians versus combatants, though Israel has also revised some of their previous statements and estimates regarding that as well. So I do think there's, as the records, as the facts on the ground are becoming even more clear to people, there's a sense within Israel that, yes, this is something that is going to need to be acknowledged, and when we're seeing it coming from the security sector first.
Is that in a sign, just finally, Julie, that we're sort of moving on to another phase of this war? The fact, though, that there is an acknowledgement of kind of the numbers that we'd seen over the last couple of years?
I'm not sure. I mean, I do think we're in a different type of phase now, obviously, than we were pre-ceasefire, 3 months ago, even though, again, things on the ground have remained extremely grim and difficult for people. But we are entering this, quote unquote, phase 2 of the ceasefire. A lot of questions remain as to, again, if Hamas will disarm, how long Israel will maintain a presence in Gaza, what the security and governance is going to look like. So it's still going to be going on for quite a long time.
Julie Norman, Associate Professor of Politics and International Relations at UCL, co-author of Gaza, the Dream and the Nightmare. Thank you very much for joining us today. And now here's Hassan Anderson with the day's other news headlines.
Thanks, Chris. Pakistani security forces say they have killed at least 145 fighters in a sweeping manhunt in Balochistan following coordinated gun and bomb attacks that killed nearly 50 people, including civilians and police. A toll officials say is the highest in decades. The assaults, claimed by the banned separatist group the Balochistan Liberation Army, have prompted security restrictions across the province, banning public gatherings, demonstrations and limiting traffic movement. Aviation leaders meeting ahead of the Singapore Air Show have warned that geopolitical tensions are continuing to hamper global airlines. Though passenger traffic is forecasted to rise more than 7% next year in the Asia-Pacific region, the world's fastest growing sector for air travel, officials have warned aviation would struggle to keep up with the projected growth without coordinated action to prevent further disruption to supply chains. And China has criticised the Dalai Lama's first Grammy win, calling the award for his audiobook Meditations a tool for anti-China political manipulation. Beijing says the exiled spiritual leader who lives in India is engaged in separatist politics, while the Dalai Lama described the prize as a recognition of our shared universal responsibility. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Chris.
Thanks very much, Hassan. to Germany now, where in the heart of winter, tens of thousands of public transport workers have gone on a one-day warning strike in all but one of Germany's 16 federal states. The strike comes as Germany's economy continues to, stagnate, growing ever so slightly last year, but so many strains are putting pressure on negotiations between unions and their employers. And joining me now from Frankfurt to discuss all of this is Karsten Brzeski, Global Head of Macro at ING Research. Karsten, are you hunkered down over there in Frankfurt for the day?
Well, not me, because I'm very happy and I'm very lucky that I can work from home. Plus, the sun is coming out, so sunshine here. But indeed, public transportation in Frankfurt is also down, and it is clearly a nuisance. But in other parts of the country, even more, because they still have minus temperatures. They have frozen sidewalks, horrible traffic conditions, and clearly there, the normal passengers of public transportations were not looking forward to have a day, going by foot, using their bikes, or any other kind of means of transportation.
I have to say, I have a personal rule, Karsten, of not cycling to work when it is minus degrees, so I can sympathize for people in Berlin and elsewhere with that. But Karsten, from the comfort of your home then, just explain, first of all, to us even this concept of a warning strike, because I feel like that in itself is a bit of a German oddity.
Yeah, I think you have to understand that clearly unions are still very strong, and especially when it comes to, the public sector, public transportation. So here the unions have a say. Apparently, the unions tried to talk to the employers already last year, I think November, December. And they are claiming that in their demands were not listened to, and therefore they come up with a one-day only warning strike, more or less to flex their muscles, where somehow we're living in an era in which muscle flexing has become very popular. So German unions are also flexing their muscles, saying that this will be really limited for one day. And then the next round of negotiations, I think, will take place in 2 weeks from now. No strikes until then, maybe after the next round of talks.
I love that you're sort of linking this almost with our geopolitical moment, Karsten, a bit of flexing of the muscles of unions. I mean, what do they actually want when they flex their muscles, or what do they not want to do that their employers are demanding of them?
Yeah, what they do want is, I think, better working conditions. So they are saying that their members or staff working in public transportation has come under severe pressure. They are asking for somewhat shorter working weeks, for more split or spread working shifts. They're also asking for higher pay when people work during the weekends or at night. So they really want to go for slightly improved working conditions. On the other hand, the employers are saying that they do not want to go to shorter working weeks. They rather want to have longer working weeks in order to capture the high demand for public transportation.
And is this symptomatic, though, Karsten, of the wider German economy, negotiations going on between unions and employer associations? Or, I mean, there's a lot of stress on the German economy more broadly at the moment. So I imagine that it's not just public transport workers that are having this argument with their employers.
No, I think it is. You're fully right. I think this is symptomatic for many parts of the German economy right now, because it also shows that people are exhausted. So we're now looking back at a period of, what is it, five years, de facto stagnation, in increased pressure clearly to get things going. It sometimes feels as if there is something like a national depression going on here. It also, I think especially this strike shows us once again that Germany has clearly a problem with, namely, the lack of qualified workers. So with the demographic change, the German labor force is going to shrink. So we are in desperate need of people. So the people working are squeezed out for as much as possible. looking forward, clearly employers are now also seeing that it's very hard to get out of this stagnation. So they will be trying to do for cost efficiency, for cost reduction. So I think this is clearly not limited to now public transportation, but we will see this conflict, this stress between employers that want to continue with cost efficiency and employees who have not benefited a lot of higher wages over the last couple of years, and are seeing more and more pressure piling up.
Just finally then, Carsten, I mean, is the model under threat? Because the idea that you have in Germany of kind of unions and employer associations working together, I mean, there have been benefits from that, from these negotiations compared to other countries. Is that kind of system falling apart or under strain through all of this?
I don't think so, Chris. I think, of course, you could argue there will be that some stress is coming on this model. But at the same time, and I think then we have to look beyond public transportation, but look into sectors that are clearly more exposed to international competition. So I think here, employers and employees, employers and unions will have to work together in order to find solutions how German industry, German companies can regain competitiveness, because it won't be able to do with only one side. So employers need their employees need a good employer. So I think the model will continue, but it is very clear that both sides will have to compromise in order to bring competitiveness back to the German economy.
Carsten Brzeski of ING Research, thank you very much for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. Now you are back with The Briefing. I'm Chris Chermak, and it's time to get the latest business headlines with Ewan Potts from Bloomberg. Ewan, always good to have you on the show. We are going to start with, well, I guess a turnaround. Last week, all the headlines were about things like gold reaching record highs, over $5,000 an ounce, and then there's been a massive sell-off. Maybe not a surprise given the highs, but tell us what's happened.
Hello, Chris. Yes, to call it a metals meltdown probably doesn't do this justice. Now, as you say, we've spoken a few times over about the record-breaking rally we've seen in precious metals, gold, silver, and platinum, all rocketing over the course of last year and into the start of this year. But everyone knows that when prices rocket upwards at a dizzying pace, at some point, it is all going to go wrong. And that point was Friday. Gold recorded its sharpest one-day drop since 1983. Gold falling more than 9%. That's a pretty big move. Gold is traditionally quite a boring asset. It tends to go up and down quite slowly, or at least until last year, that is. Silver plunged 27% in one session, losing a quarter of its value just on Friday. Both metals continuing to fall today, although I should say there has been some buying in the last few hours. That's just taken a little bit of the edge off the drops. Now, the trigger for the dramatic sell-off was the news that President Trump is to nominate Kevin Warsh to lead the Federal Reserve. Now, that sent the dollar higher and undercut sentiment among investors who'd been betting on Trump's willingness to let the dollar weaken. Now, traders regard Walsh as the toughest inflation figure among the possible candidates for the Fed. So that's raised expectations of tighter monetary policy, and that should underpin the dollar, helping to stem the slide in the dollar. And all of that is a headwind for gold, which is priced in dollars. Now, that may not seem like much of a reason for such a colossal sell-off, but remember that there were huge numbers of leverage bets in the market. So that's investors who borrowed money and bought products with double and triple exposure to gold and silver. And once those bets start to unwind, when the price goes down a bit, you need to cover those bets. And then the whole thing kind of gains a life of its own and starts spiraling downwards. So really, really dramatic moves in precious metals.
Dramatic, really interesting, Ewan. And I mean, the fact that this came from the announcement of Donald Trump about Kevin Warsh on Friday, does that show also really how jittery the markets are at the moment? This link, and we've discussed this also many times on this show, between kind of political decisions and the markets. But the fact that people were worried that Trump was going to pick somebody else and sort of inject more uncertainty into the market, it's dissipating for now. But I mean, how long is that going to last?
Yeah, well, it's been fascinating, really. There's loads of speculation about what kind of Fed governor Kevin Warsh is going to be, because he is actually a known quantity. He's a former governor of the Federal Reserve. And back then, he was known as an inflation hawk, somebody who worried about prices and wanted higher interest rates to make sure that inflation stayed under control. And he's also been quite hawkish on the Fed's balance sheet. So all that money which was ramped up under quantitative easing, all those billions of dollars, trillions of dollars, in fact, sitting on the Fed's balance sheet. He says that the Fed has been too interventionist in the past and it should run down the balance sheet. So that is also on the hawkish side of the spectrum. But of course, on the other side of the debate, Donald Trump has been very, very clear from the beginning that he wants to see lower interest rates. And you kind of wonder he wouldn't have picked Kevin Warsh if he thought he was going to be super hawkish on interest rates. So we're just kind of debating whether we're going to get Warsh of old or Warsh of new. So no one's quite sure about that. So that's going to be fascinating.
Warsh of old or Warsh of new. I like that, Ewan. Well, we'll be discussing that, I'm sure, as he gets into the job and has to face some sort of pressures from Trump if he doesn't follow. But there is kind of related news to this as well, because on the one hand, if you mention that Kevin Warsh is an inflation hawk, that would suggest that inflation is not going to rise. And yet you also bring us news that some of the world's biggest investors are weighing the prospect that inflation may actually tick higher over the next couple of years.
Yeah, interesting this. Money managers at BlackRock, Bridgewater and PIMCO, three of the biggest investors in the world, are shoring up their portfolios against a fresh bout of inflation. Now, to be clear, we're not talking about another dose of double-digit prices like we saw post-pandemic after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Don't worry, nobody's expecting really bad inflation, the likes of which we saw in recent years. But there are signs that a number of countries around the world, inflation is not as under control as central banks would like. Now, as I mentioned before, the big talking point is over Trump's nominee to lead the Fed. And we're not quite sure how Kevin Warsh is going to behave. And also remember that he has to get through Senate confirmation first. That's not guaranteed. And also, once he leads the Fed, he will just be one member of the FOMC, the committee which sets interest rates. And of course, he'll be the most important one, and he'll be very influential. But he will not be the only person on the committee. So if he wades in there and says, let's slash interest rates, it's not as simple as that. So there's still lots of unknowns around US interest rates. But inflation in the US is certainly not quite where the Fed would like it. And if you look further field as well, here in the UK, inflation currently 3.4%. That is well above the 2% target. And recent economic data in the UK has surprised to the upside. So that's leading investors to speculate that the higher inflation will come down more slowly than expected. And over in Australia, that's already proving some of the inflation pessimists right. Traders have been ramping up bets that the central bank is going to increase interest rates tomorrow in Australia as domestic prices creep higher. And that would be a potentially awkward about face because it's actually only 6 months since the Australian central bank cut interest rates. So there are signs in a number of places around the world that inflation is not really where we want it.
And it's not an easy time to be a central banker, let's put it that way. Ewan Potts of Bloomberg, thank you very much for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. This is The Briefing, and finally on today's show, music's big awards night. The Grammys took place over the weekend, and joining me in the studio to tell us all about it is Monocle's senior correspondent, Fernando Augusto Pacheco. Of course, Fernando, happy to have you here on a Monday. How was your weekend?
It was great. It was very interesting, and I have some cultural recommendations, or not, Chris. But you prefer to start with the Grammys, right?
I think let's start with the Grammys. I know we have something else we want to discuss as well about your weekend, but yes, let's start with the Grammys.
Listen, first of all, I have to say the Grammys in recent years, I think they are improving as an award ceremony. I know it's surprising to say because a lot of people, they criticize ceremonies, but I think it's a little bit more kind of its time. You know, there was a period where, you know, they kind of always had those heritage acts. It looked like the Grammy voters and the producers were not seeing what's happening on TikTok. It changed. And I think a classic example, and we do have a clip of that, is for the person that won Album of the Year. I think we're going to play a little clip and then discuss a little bit more about this historic victory.
I want to dedicate this award to all the people that had to leave their homeland, their country to follow their dreams, para todas las personas que han perdido un ser querido y aún así han tenido que seguir hacia adelante y continuar con mucha fuerza. Este premio es para ustedes. Gracias por tanto amor. Los quiero. A todos los latinos en el mundo entero y todos los artistas que estuvieron antes.
To all the Latins around the world. I mean, it's Bad Bunny with his album Debí Tirar Más Fotos. And I think, liking or not, it was, that album had a cultural impact, especially in the United States, because it's funny, somebody was asking me just a few minutes ago about the Latin Grammys. Of course, it happens every December. And so it's quite rare to have a Latin artist entering the main categories at the Grammys. But Bad Bunny not only was nominated, he won. And it was the only album that I could think that could have won this year as well.
And it was the first time, I understand, that a Latin artist won Album of the Year. Frankly, even if you have the Latin Grammys, what took so long?
Yeah, the first Spanish language artist to win. In 1964, we had João Gilberto with Stan Getz, so, it's a little bit Latin, but my God, we're talking about the 60s here. So it did took her very long. Let's remember, like the Oscars, the Grammys, they are quite, conservative with a small c. They're very cautious, but not this year. And I think what I like about Bad Bunny, he's quite brave. And even from the award ceremonies that we've seen so far this year, the Golden Globes and a few others, I thought actually was quite tame, especially in the political era that we're living in the United States with the ICE agents. That didn't happen at the Grammys. He was very clear. I want ICE out. And he was not the only artist to do that. You had other people that won, like Billie Eilish with Wildflower. She did mention ICE. Olivia Dean, Best New Artist. She said, I'm the granddaughter of immigrants. So it was a very politicized show, which was a nice surprise because the film ceremonies that we've seen so far, meh.
Stayed away from the politics?
A little bit. I mean, there was some political, speeches here and there, but not quite like the Grammys.
Well, and also just speaking of the internationalization element, I'm curious, Faye, because we've talked about this with the others as well, like the Oscars doing more foreign language films. Is that something you kind of saw with the Grammys as well, a sign there, whether it's Bad Bunny winning his first Latin artist, or also, we should mention for that matter, K-pop getting its first song awarded in the Grammys with, of course, Golden, the big Demon Hunters track that is absolutely everywhere, but a sign that, the Grammys are recognizing the international influence.
Absolutely. And again, they have to, because like with film and music, Americans themselves are consuming that type of music. I mean, K-pop is a huge market in the United States, so of course the Grammys have to kind of portray that. And as I said, too little, too late, even. They are catching up, but you're right. I think, you see more and more. It's not just Bad Bunny, but you had people like Karol G from Colombia, especially in the Latin world. And they're not, because in the past you had Latin music, you had your Ricky Martins, I'm not saying it's a new thing, but now they're singing only in Spanish. They're not doing kind of a duet, kind of a Spanglish. I remember at the time, I was from the time of the Spanglish era.
It's like they always had to bring in an American singer to change their track from like a Spanish to a hybrid in order to make it in the States.
Exactly. It was fun, the Living La Vida Locas, but I think it's also great that we have Bad Bunny with a fantastic album. He's a great musician, and next weekend is the Super Bowl as well, right?
It is the Super Bowl, exactly. He is the man of the moment. But let's move on to something else, Faye, before we let you go. How did your weekend start, by chance? May I ask? What did you do on Friday, was it?
Yes. Well, it was actually on a Saturday, very grey early afternoon at a cinema in Finchley Road. I went, that far to see Melania.
She joined you. That's in my neck of the woods, Faye.
You should have, because, I have to say, if you want to know how many people there were in the screen, 14. It was a very small screen. So it was partially empty. It was not, it was not completely empty. As I said, it was me and other 13 people there. I am disappointed. And you know why I'm disappointed? Of course, because of the political connotations. We have a clip of the trailer. And the trailer, I have to say, it was a very well done trailer. It was promising camp. It was promising something strange. It made me curious to watch it. Let's have a listen to the trailer.
Together with like-minded leaders, we have a voice. Is it safe?
It is safe.
Everyone wants to know. So here it is. Hi, Mr. President. Congratulations.
Did you watch it?
I did not. Yeah, I will see it on the news.
Oh, what a disappointment. I mean, if you look at the trailer, I mean, the best bits are in the trailer. So if you want to watch Melania, go and watch the trailer.
It is so sad to hear you say that, because I think there was actually, what was he saying, not that many people watched. Although in the US, I have to say, it actually did, from what I understand, quite well for a documentary, about 7 million over the weekend, which is a big number. So people were interested, but they're not going to learn much.
Best opening for a documentary in the decade. But again, it's only $7 million, and just the PR campaign for the film is $35 million, plus $40 million for the production and everything. So, you know, I don't know how the film will recoup its money. Somehow, I'm sure they will be fine. But yeah, I mean, the lack of new information, that was the surprising thing. I was even, you know, telling my partner that the only bit that perhaps you see a more human side of Melania as well, when somebody asked, what's your favorite recording artist? And then she got happy and she started smiling, saying it's Michael Jackson, and how much she loves Billie Jean. You know, that was kind of the more revealing.
That's the revelation.
That's the revelation we get
about Melania. She likes Michael Jackson.
But Chris, I know you, of course, you talk a lot about U.S. politics to Monocle Radio listeners. In that sense, I think it's interesting to see, because it's a film of its time as well, because you have a lot of camera access to all the inauguration events of Trump. You see everyone that was sat on the table, from Jeff Bezos, Laura Sanchez, Elon Musk. It's quite interesting. So yeah, it's nothing new, but just seeing those people kind of drinking champagne, it tells you a lot about the world in 2026. So in that sense, from an anthropological point of view, perhaps you could watch, or you can wait until it's out on Amazon.
A bit of a window. I have to say, I was reading this one Vanity Fair, particularly review, that struck me, where they say, if you were making a movie that parodied the current First Lady, I'm not sure what you would do differently. True?
True. And if you like high heels as well, there are plenty of it. There's a lot of shots of, Melania's high heels. I think Brett Ratner, the disgraced director who did this film, I think he's obsessed with her foot as well.
Well, that's as good a place to end as anywhere. Fernando Augusto Pacheco, thank you very much for joining us. That's all the time we have for this edition of The Briefing. It was produced by Christy O'Grady. Our researcher was Annalise Maynard, and our studio manager was Mariella Bevan. The Briefing is back tomorrow at the same time, and I will be your host. Back tomorrow, I'm Chris Chermak. Goodbye, and thanks for listening.